Welcome to World of Stories, a podcast about how stories shape our lives. I'm Eileen, and my pronoun is she.
I'm Margrit, and my pronoun is they. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, Margrit. How are you today?
I'm super excited because we're going to talk about Eileen's project called Queer of Color. I could gush about it endlessly, but really, I just want to hear from you, and I'm sure our listeners do too. So, what's the origin story of Queer of Color?
Well, it started in January 2020 when I got involved with a project called Open Secrets. And the goal of Open Secrets was to explore lesser known stories within Toronto's LGBTQ community. But the organization that was running the project had limited capacity to explore these stories in any expansive way. They had limited budgeting and limited time. The scope of the project was imposed by the organization's funders. So when I got involved with the project, I thought, these stories deserve more time and attention than the Open Secrets Project can give to it. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of unheard stories in Toronto's LGBTQ community, and they deserve to be told and they deserve to be heard. So that's how Queer of Color was born.
I'm always interested in other creative people's idea generation, and I love that you wanted to give space to previously unheard voices.
Yeah, I kind of took the Open Secrets idea of exploring the untold stories and personalized it because I'm a queer person of color, surprise, surprise. And I wanted to hear more stories about people like me, people who have to navigate what it means to be a person of color in a white dominated society, as well as being a queer person in a heteronormative society. But I think more than that, I also wanted to hear stories of people who live with disabilities, who are neurodivergent, who are trans and gender nonconforming, because, well, one, these people exist and they deserve to be heard.
Hmm.
And two, a lot of these identities intersect in diverse and interesting ways. There are amazing similarities in the life experiences of people from marginalized communities, but there's also a huge diversity of experience. And I think it's really powerful to explore how we are different and yet the same.
Absolutely. I remember the other day you posted something on your Instagram about how, and I'm going to quote this because I loved it so much. Mentors and role models for queer people of color are rare. It's not often that we have people who are older and wiser whom we can go to with questions. Queer of Color is an attempt to share our stories and experiences with each other, to build a community, to remind ourselves that we are not alone. I love that so much. So, first, listeners, go follow Eileen at Queer of Color with the Canadian spelling, so color spelled with a U. And second, what is the larger goal behind collecting these stories for you, Eileen?
Well, stories are powerful, and I love saying that. Stories can shape reality and change history, and that's what I want to do. I mean, not to be egotistical about it, but I want to change history. The saying that history is written by the victors?
Hmm.
Well, it's 100% true.
For sure.
And we know that just from the history textbooks that kids use in school. And I really think it's time that we take back the narrative. It's time we tell our own stories on our own terms and we create a world that we want to live in. And stories can do that. They allow us to imagine a world, an ideal society, a utopia. And even if we never get there, which, okay, let's be honest, we probably won't, stories will at least give us a direction to head in. They give us a blueprint of what is possible. They inspire us to do the work, to take risks, to stand up for what we believe in. And stories help us feel less alone. They remind us that there are others like us out there who want the same things, and we can form a community, we can find connections and build relationships. One thing I want to be clear about is that there have always been storytellers from all walks of life, from all cultures and all backgrounds. And there have always been people who use stories to empower their community. But their stories have been ignored and suppressed by colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, all that stuff.
Mhm.
So it's not like these stories didn't exist, but it's a matter of finding these stories and getting them out there for the world to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been nodding all throughout your explanation because I totally agree. And actually, this archaeology of uncovering stories by marginalized people has a strong academic tradition and lots of methodologies and a lot of disciplines. But I think we're now seeing an amazing increase in both calls for representation and actual stories. By marginalized people in the larger public sphere. And
Mhm.
I personally think that's a wonderful way to allow us to imagine better, more inclusive futures, like you're saying. So, who are the people you're interviewing who will help us see these brighter futures?
Everyone, anyone who identifies as a person of color and a member of the LGBTQIA2S plus community. I literally want to talk to people of all ages, all ethnicities, all religious backgrounds, all levels of ability and disability who work in all sorts of industries because we exist everywhere and in all forms, and all of our stories are valuable and valid. So at the moment, I've just started out the project, so I've been reaching out to friends and guilt tripping them into participating. But I've also made some contacts through the Asian artistic community in Toronto. Again, that's through my own connections. But I would love to interview people from other walks of life who are completely not like me, who, have don't have any connection to my day to day. The challenge I'm finding though is that, it takes a lot of time to interview people and to write up their stories. Plus, there's a pandemic, so I can't actually meet anyone person to person, which is what I would prefer to do.
I totally understand that. Yeah. And actually, the stories that you've posted have an intimate feel to them, and that must be hard to achieve in virtual encounters. So, how did you build rapport with your interviewees?
You know, I don't know. I think meeting people in person is one part of it. They can see, hey, I'm a real person rather than just a floating head on their computer screen. And another part of it is that the people who volunteer to participate in this kind of project are naturally more willing to share. They know what the purpose of the project is. I'm very upfront about the types of questions I'll be asking, and they've agreed to talk about these things. I make a point to never pressure anyone to talk about something they don't want to talk about. So I want the experience to be safe and enjoyable throughout. And so I ask if there are any topics that are off limits, or if they want to share something but off the record, that's okay too. If they want to remain anonymous, that's totally cool. The whole point is that they can tell their stories on their own terms, whatever those terms happen to be. Another thing that doesn't come across in the stories I've posted is that there's a lot of conversation that I cut out. There's a lot of back and forth. So I also share a lot about myself when I chat with these folks. And I mean, yes, it's an interview, so the focus is on the storyteller, but if there's a point of connection or if they're curious about me, I'm totally open to talking about myself too.
That makes sense. Even if the focus is on your interviewee, the connection could probably not happen without you sharing parts of yourself. And
Hmm.
and there's so much of you in this project. From what I know about you, from what your interests are, and even if people know you from the podcast, they will see that that's your interest in equity and diversity really fuels this, and we can see it there. So, where would you like this project to evolve? How do you see it develop?
Oh my God, so many things. I would love to expand in the stories into audio, into video, podcasts and films. I'd love to compile the stories into books and audiobooks, basically every format under the sun, and to make these as accessible to everyone as possible. I'd love to do like in-person events when we're allowed to do that again, where
Hmm.
maybe I'll interview people, or maybe they could tell stories that they've written themselves, or they could present workshops to young people so that they can see like, hey, queer people of color can do some really cool stuff. Um, I'd love to interview people in other parts of the world. Like queer people don't exist only in the West, they exist in Asia and in Latin America and in Africa. So I'd love to be able to travel to those places and interview queer people of color who are living in non white dominated societies. Because again, my experience is so Western that it would be really interesting to see how other people are the same or different while living in a non-Western context. I think ultimately the vision and the dream is to be able to touch people with these stories to change lives. I'd love to find a way to not only inspire people to pursue their dreams, but help them get there. So, whether that's scholarships for education and training, or mentorship from someone who looks like them, who has lived through those experiences, I want to use the power of storytelling to help queer people of color thrive.
I really hope you do. And how can our listeners find you and maybe support this amazing project?
Thank you so much. You can find everything at queerofcolour.ca, and that's color with a U, and on all the social media, so that Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, at Queer of Color again. I also have a Ko-fi, so if you'd like to support in that way, you can go to ko.fi.com/queer of color, and please, please, please spread the word.
Do that, spread the word. It's a really worthwhile project to support. So, our recommendation of the episode is obviously Queer of Color. Go check out the stories and let your life be touched and enriched by them. Follow Eileen on Instagram and Twitter and spread the word to your own circles.
And our question of the week for our listeners is, what kind of stories do you think are missing from our culture? And what would you like to see more of?
As always, you can join the conversation on Twitter at world_of_stories, or you can email us directly at worldofstoriespodcast@gmail.com. And if you like our show, please share the podcast with your friends. You can rate and review World of Stories on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all the other major podcasting platforms. The more reviews we get, the easier it will be for new listeners to find us.
And lastly, if you'd like to partner with us in producing the podcast, we appreciate every contribution, no matter how big or small. You can donate at ko.fi.com/world of stories. Thank you so much for listening. Stay safe.
And keep on humaning.